For centuries, stories, rumors, and outright lies have shaped the course of history, often with devastating consequences. In the United States, false narratives and misinformation have been wielded as tools of power, designed to manipulate, control, and oppress. These lies were not harmless, they were dangerous. Often deadly, they fueled racial fear, justified violent actions, and tore apart families and entire communities. Today, we are going to uncover some of these truths, shining a light on the hidden and painful history that many have tried to forget. Imagine a single claim, a simple accusation, spreading through a town, igniting fear and anger. One person's lie could be enough to destroy livelihoods, ruin reputations, and even take lives. In the cases we will explore, these were not just isolated incidents, they were part of a systemic pattern that targeted black communities, exploiting prejudice and societal bias to maintain control and reinforce inequality. From acts of lynching and murder to mass displacement and injustice in the legal system, the consequences were heartbreaking and lasting. But this story is not just about the past, it is about understanding how misinformation works, how falsehoods can escalate, and why recognizing the truth matters today. By examining these events, we honor the memories of those who suffered, acknowledge the resilience of those who survived, and learn lessons that can guide our society toward justice and equality. Before we dive deeper, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. By joining our community, you help us continue sharing stories that educate, inspire, and empower. Turn on notifications so you never miss an episode that uncovers history in ways you won't see anywhere else. Together, we can confront the past with honesty, spark meaningful conversations, and create a future where truth and accountability prevail. In this video, we will explore 10 pivotal events where white lies led to unimaginable consequences. From the tragic lynching of innocent individuals to entire communities being devastated. We will hear the stories behind the headlines, understand the social and historical context, and examine the ripple effects that still impact society today. These are not just stories of suffering, they are stories of resilience, courage, and the unyielding quest for justice. Stay with us as we journey through history, revealing the lies that shaped lives, the courage of those who resisted, and the lessons we must carry forward. By confronting these painful truths, we take the first step toward building a more informed, just, and equitable world. As we delve deeper into the painful history of racial injustice in America, certain events stand out not only for their tragic outcomes, but also for the way they reveal the destructive power of lies and false narratives. Take, for example, the lynching of Mary Turner in 1918, a young woman 8 months pregnant, whose life was brutally cut short after speaking out against the murder of her husband. The story begins with her husband, Hayes Turner, who had been accused of killing a local white farmer. Despite the lack of concrete evidence and the resolution of previous disputes, a white, fueled by racial hatred and false claims, seized Hayes and several other black men, leading to their lynching. Mary Turner, refusing to remain silent in the face of injustice, spoke out publicly against the atrocity, and her courage became the very reason she was targeted. The mob subjected her to unimaginable violence, ending both her life and the life of her unborn child. This single event, harrowing as it is, reveals how one fabricated accusation can set into motion a chain of cruelty that destroys lives and families, leaving scars that generations carry. Decades later, in 1955, another young life was extinguished under the shadow of a false accusation. Emmett Till, a 14-year-old boy from Chicago, traveled to Mississippi to visit relatives, unaware that his very presence would become the focus of lethal attention. A casual interaction in a store, magnified and distorted by a white woman's fabricated claim, led to Till's abduction, torture, and murder at the hands of men determined to uphold a racially charged notion of honor and dominance. The community's response, both local and national, highlighted the deep-seated prejudices that enabled such violence, showing how lies intertwined with societal fears can have fatal consequences. Emmett Till's death did not just shatter his family, it reverberated through the nation, igniting conversations about civil rights and the urgent need for justice. Looking further back, the Wilmington insurrection of 1898 exposes a pattern of manipulation and deception at a communal level. Wilmington, North Carolina, was a city where black citizens had achieved notable economic and political progress, a success seen as a threat by white supremacists. Tensions escalated when a black-owned newspaper published an article advocating for equality, which white supremacist groups distorted, claiming it called for armed rebellion. This fabrication became the spark that justified a violent coup. Armed white men, organized and deliberate, attacked black neighborhoods, destroyed businesses, and killed dozens of African Americans. The insurrection did not merely result in immediate deaths. It dismantled a functioning local government, replaced it with a segregationist regime, and cemented a long-standing climate of fear. In this case, misinformation became a strategic weapon, demonstrating how deception can serve as a tool to rewrite power dynamics and suppress progress. Similarly, the Rosewood Massacre of 1923 illustrates the catastrophic consequences of a single accusation, however untrue. In the small Florida town of Rosewood, Fannie Taylor's claim of an assault, later revealed to be false, incited a violent white mob that descended on the black community, burning homes and killing residents. Entire families fled into the woods, hiding for days in the cold. As their town was systematically destroyed, the survivors never returned, leaving behind a community erased from the map. Its history only pieced together decades later through survivor testimonies and scholarly research. The lies that ignited Rosewood were not just personal fabrications, they were entwined with broader societal prejudices that made such violence possible, and, for years, allowed it to remain unpunished. The Tulsa Greenwood Massacre of 1921, often referred to as the destruction of Black Wall Street, follows a similar tragic pattern. A fabricated allegation against a young black man named Dick Rowland triggered a catastrophic eruption of racial violence in a thriving African American district. A prosperous community, known for its businesses, schools, and cultural vitality, was laid to waste as white mobs looted, burned, and killed. Over the course of 2 days, hundreds of lives were lost, thousands were left homeless, and an entire neighborhood was reduced to ashes. What makes this event particularly striking is that the spark, a single, false accusation, was enough to mobilize entrenched fears and long-standing prejudices into mass violence, illustrating the peril of deception when it intersects with systemic racism and collective anger. Across these events, a thread emerges: false claims, whether small fabrications or orchestrated lies, have repeatedly triggered devastating outcomes for black communities in America. Each story: Mary Turner, Emmett Till, Wilmington, Rosewood, Tulsa carries its own context, its own unique horrors, yet they are bound together by a recurring pattern of injustice. Lies serve as catalysts, magnified by social fears, entrenched prejudices, and institutional complicity, and in doing so, they transform individual incidents into collective tragedies. These historical narratives remind us that deception is not abstract. It has real, often fatal consequences, shaping the lives of those caught in its path. Understanding these events is not merely an academic exercise, it is a way to honor the lives lost, recognize the systemic forces at play, and confront the mechanisms that allow falsehoods to persist. so that society can work toward preventing history from repeating itself. Through these intertwined accounts, we witness how the power of a single untruth can ripple outward, altering lives, communities, and the very fabric of society, and how courage, resilience, and remembrance remain essential in the ongoing pursuit of justice and equality. As the stories of Mary Turner, Emmett Till, and the tragedies of Wilmington, Rosewood, and Tulsa unfold, one striking pattern becomes impossible to ignore: the complicity of institutions that were meant to protect, serve, and uphold justice, from law enforcement to the courts and the press. These pillars of society often played a role not in safeguarding truth, but in amplifying deception and perpetuating racial injustice. The lynching of Mary Turner illustrates this chilling dynamic, as the authorities turned a blind eye to the mob violence that claimed her life and that of her unborn child, failing to intervene or hold perpetrators accountable despite the obvious lack of evidence against her husband and the others accused. The local police and judicial system, influenced by prevailing racial biases, did nothing to challenge the mob or investigate the truth, effectively sanctioning the horrific act, demonstrating how systemic neglect can become a weapon of oppression. Similarly, the murder of Emmett Till revealed the destructive power of both societal prejudice and institutional failure. The fabricated accusation made against him by Carolyn Bryant, the white woman in the Mississippi store, became the accepted narrative for local authorities and the media alike, overshadowing eyewitness accounts and disregarding the facts of Till's behavior. Law enforcement officials not only failed to protect him, but also allowed his abductors to act with impunity, illustrating how institutions, rather than ensuring justice, were complicit in perpetuating racial terror. The media's portrayal of the incident further entrenched these distortions, often framing the story in ways that inflamed public sentiment, justified the violence, and obscured the truth, highlighting how false narratives can gain power when they are reinforced by influential societal structures. The Wilmington insurrection of 1898 exemplifies the orchestrated manipulation of institutions on a grander scale. White supremacist leaders exploited the legal system and political offices to validate their claims that black residents were plotting an uprising, a narrative that was entirely fabricated. Local authorities and city officials either supported or failed to challenge these assertions, allowing paramilitary groups to carry out acts of violence with impunity. Newspapers, both local and regional, spread distorted accounts that painted black citizens as dangerous conspirators, intensifying fear and providing justification for the ensuing massacre and political coup. The intertwining of media distortion, institutional negligence, and overt bias created a perfect storm in which lies could flourish, resulting in the deaths of dozens and the displacement of countless more. The Rosewood massacre further underscores the deadly combination of lies, rumor, and institutional failure. Fannie Taylor's accusation against a black man set in motion a violent white mob, yet law enforcement failed to intervene or protect the innocent residents. Not only did the authorities neglect to maintain peace, but courts and officials later ignored calls for accountability, leaving survivors without justice for years. In this case, the media, while limited in reach compared to modern standards, still played a role in spreading fear and sensationalizing claims, amplifying panic and racial tension that contributed to the town's destruction. The authorities' inaction was not mere oversight, it was a systemic issue, reflecting broader societal norms that devalued black lives and allowed bias to dictate responses to crisis. In Tulsa, the story repeats on a scale that devastates an entire community. Following the accusation against Dick Rowland, law enforcement and local officials failed to protect him or the Greenwood district, while the National Guard's delayed intervention did little to prevent widespread violence. The press, caught between sensationalism and prevailing racial attitudes, often reported biased accounts, framing the black residents as aggressors and ignoring the defensive actions taken by community members. The result was catastrophic. Hundreds killed, thousands displaced, and a prosperous community obliterated. Institutions, from the police to the courts to the media, did not serve as a check against falsehoods and violence. Instead, they reinforced the very narratives that justified destruction. Even beyond overt acts of violence, systemic exploitation and deception relied heavily on institutional complicity. The Tuskegee syphilis study, where hundreds of black men were misled into participating in a decades-long medical experiment, thrived because government agencies, medical authorities, and public health officials actively concealed the truth. Participants were told they were receiving treatment while researchers documented the natural progression of disease, a manipulation sanctioned by those in power. The legal and bureaucratic systems provided cover, allowing unethical experimentation to continue for 40 years, showing that harm can be systemic, slow, and insidious when institutions prioritize control and deception over ethics and human life. Across all these accounts, a haunting continuity emerges. Institutions that are entrusted with justice and protection often failed, sometimes through neglect and sometimes through active participation in spreading lies. Police officers, judges, public officials, and media outlets were not merely passive observers. Their actions, biases, and omissions amplified false narratives and sanctioned violence. The stories of Mary Turner, Emmett Till, Wilmington, Rosewood, Tulsa, and the Tuskegee study are not just tales of individual wrongdoing, they are testimonies to a system where institutions upheld racial hierarchies, allowed lies to dictate consequences, and left communities vulnerable to unimaginable suffering. Understanding the role of law enforcement, legal systems, and media in perpetuating injustice is essential not only to comprehending these historical events but also to recognizing patterns that continue to influence society today. When institutions fail to uphold truth, the consequences ripple outward, affecting generations. These stories remind us that justice is not simply about the law, it is about accountability, vigilance, and the courage to challenge falsehoods at every level of power. Through this lens, the historical tragedies we have explored serve as both a warning and a call to action, emphasizing that the fight for equity and truth is as much about institutional reform as it is about individual awareness and courage. Long before modern debates around ethics and equity in medicine, the Tuskegee syphilis study emerged as a chilling testament to how deception and institutional power could converge to devastating effect, leaving a legacy of mistrust and suffering that reverberates to this day. In 1932, the United States Public Health Service launched a study in Macon County, Alabama, targeting black sharecroppers under the pretense of providing free health care, offering participants medical exams, meals, and burial insurance, all framed as a benevolent service to a vulnerable population. For the 600 men who enrolled, this promise of care was a lifeline, an opportunity to access treatment in a society where systemic barriers had long denied black communities adequate medical attention. Yet, behind the veneer of assistance lay a carefully orchestrated deception. The true aim of the study was not to heal, but to observe the natural progression of untreated syphilis, a disease that ravaged bodies and shattered lives, all while researchers systematically withheld treatment and crucial information. The men, trusting the authority of doctors and public health officials, remained unaware of the fatal risks, their lives and families unknowingly placed in jeopardy by the very institutions sworn to protect them. Eugene Dibble, president of Tuskegee Institute, and Jr. John Charles Cutler, a public health service officer, were central figures in orchestrating this ethical violation. exploiting both social hierarchies and racial assumptions to maintain compliance. Their manipulation was meticulous. Participants were told they were being treated for bad blood, a vague term encompassing several illnesses, while in reality, they were subjected to monitoring that documented the ravages of syphilis over decades. Symptoms that might have prompted intervention: blindness, paralysis, cognitive decline were meticulously recorded rather than treated, and when penicillin emerged as a standard cure in 1947, the men were still denied access. Generations were affected as untreated disease spread silently within families, resulting in congenital syphilis in children, a grim reminder of how institutional deceit extended harm far beyond its immediate victims. The mechanisms that allowed the Tuskegee study to persist illustrate the broader systemic failings of the time. Legal frameworks, regulatory oversight, and professional ethics were either manipulated or ignored, allowing researchers to operate without accountability. Public health agencies shielded the study from scrutiny, and the broader medical community largely turned a blind eye, tacitly condoning the abuse by not challenging it. Whistleblowers who sought to expose the truth faced immense obstacles, and even when the study was finally revealed in 1972, the fallout required congressional hearings, public outrage, and lawsuits before justice could begin to be acknowledged, leaving in its wake an estimated 128 deaths and hundreds of infections that might have been prevented. The study's endurance over 40 years demonstrates how the authority of institutions, when combined with racial prejudice, can create an environment where truth is subverted and human life is devalued. The story of Tuskegee cannot be divorced from the broader context of historical racial oppression explored in earlier events such as the lynching of Mary Turner, the murder of Emmett Till, and the massacres in Wilmington, Rosewood, and Tulsa. In each instance, lies, whether fabricated accusations or misrepresented actions, were amplified by those in positions of power, be they local authorities, law enforcement, courts, or media outlets, producing consequences that were both immediate and generational. Just as the failure of the legal and law enforcement systems allowed violent mobs to claim innocent lives, the complicity of public health institutions permitted prolonged suffering under the guise of benevolence. Cases, institutional authority whether wielded with malice, negligence, or complacency served as the catalyst that transformed lies into systemic harm, showing that oppression is often most lethal when cloaked in legitimacy. What makes the Tuskegee study particularly insidious is that it combined scientific authority with racial prejudice, exploiting both the trust and the vulnerability of black communities. Men who might have sought help were instead subjected to surveillance of their illness, their suffering meticulously documented for research rather than alleviated. Families were caught in the crossfire, as infections spread and loved ones succumbed to a preventable fate. The study's reach extended far beyond the clinic, shaping perceptions of medical institutions and instilling a deep-seated mistrust of healthcare among Black Americans, a mistrust that persists today, influencing attitudes toward vaccines, screenings, and preventive care. The psychological toll mirrored the physical devastation, as entire communities grappled with the knowledge that those entrusted with their well-being had deliberately misled them, reinforcing a societal pattern in which black lives were deemed expendable in pursuit of the agendas of those in power. Examining Tuskegee alongside the historical episodes of racial violence and false accusations underscores a fundamental continuity: the lethal impact of deception when backed by authority. Whether through a fabricated accusation that incited a lynch mob, media distortion that inflamed racial panic, or a public health study that violated ethical imperatives, the consequences were catastrophic. The men of Tuskegee were not isolated in their suffering. They were part of a historical continuum in which systemic power was wielded to perpetuate injustice and maintain racial hierarchies. The study exemplifies how institutional abuse can operate quietly, subtly, and methodically, leaving long-term consequences that outlive immediate events and affect generations. Understanding Tuskegee within this broader narrative is essential to comprehending how institutions can fail, intentionally or negligently, when moral and ethical responsibility is subordinated to authority, prejudice, or the pursuit of power. The lessons resonate beyond medical ethics. They highlight the critical need for accountability, transparency, and vigilance in every institution that holds sway over human lives. By tracing the trajectory from false accusations and violent uprisings to systematic medical deception, the story of Tuskegee deepens our understanding of how institutionalized lies can devastate communities, offering a cautionary tale about the persistent dangers of deception when reinforced by authority, and a reminder that the pursuit of justice requires relentless scrutiny and unwavering commitment to truth. As we reach the end of this journey through some of the darkest chapters of our shared history, it is impossible not to feel the weight of the stories we have explored: the lynching of Mary Turner, the murder of Emmett Till, the Wilmington insurrection, the Rosewood Massacre, the Tulsa Greenwood Massacre, the Tuskegee syphilis study, and other acts of institutionalized deception and racial violence. Each of these events, while separated by decades and geography, shares a haunting through line: the deadly power of lies and misinformation, often amplified by societal structures, law enforcement, media, and public institutions that were meant to uphold justice but instead perpetuated cruelty and injustice. These falsehoods were never harmless. They cost lives, tore families apart, and left scars on entire communities that still echo today. They remind us that the distortion of truth is not a matter of words alone. It is a weapon, one that has historically been wielded against Black people to sustain oppression, fear, and systemic inequality. Confronting this history is not an exercise in dwelling on pain, but a necessary act of acknowledgement, a recognition of the humanity and dignity of those who suffered and perished as a result of deceit. The stories we have revisited demand that we see the victims not as distant figures in history, but as real people with dreams, aspirations, and loved ones whose lives were tragically cut short by circumstances beyond their control. Mary Turner, Emmett Till, and the countless others were silenced by lies. Yet their voices endure through the telling of these narratives. Remembering them is an act of justice in itself. It ensures that the truths of their lives and deaths are not forgotten, and that the lessons they carry continue to shape our collective conscience. Acknowledging the suffering caused by these falsehoods also calls us to recognize the systems that enabled them. The collusion of law enforcement, the legal system, and media, along with the societal structures that condoned or ignored such injustices, underscores the depth of institutional complicity. From coerced confessions and manipulated narratives to the deliberate denial of medical treatment in Tuskegee, each case highlights a broader pattern in which truth was suppressed and power abused. By examining these failures, we gain insight into the mechanisms that allow injustice to flourish, and we equip ourselves with the knowledge needed to challenge similar patterns in the present and future. Accountability, then, is not only about holding individual perpetrators responsible, but about critically evaluating and reforming the institutions and cultural practices that have historically enabled these abuses. Equally important is the commitment to truth. In a world where misinformation can spread rapidly, the lessons of history remind us of the human cost of deception. It is our collective responsibility to seek accurate information, question narratives that reinforce bias, and ensure that the stories of marginalized communities are represented faithfully. Truth-telling is not only a moral imperative, it is a foundation for societal healing. When we confront falsehoods, acknowledge wrongdoing, and honor the memories of those harmed, we lay the groundwork for genuine reconciliation and meaningful progress. racial equality, the ultimate goal threading through these narratives, is inseparable from this work. Each act of violence and deception targeted at Black individuals or communities was rooted in the belief that their lives were less valuable, their voices less worthy, their humanity expendable. Recognizing the historical roots of racial injustice allows us to address the systemic inequalities that persist today by educating ourselves and others, advocating for equitable policies, and fostering inclusive communities. We honor the courage of those who endured these horrors and continue their legacy of resilience. The fight for racial equality is ongoing, and understanding history is essential to ensuring that we do not repeat the mistakes of the past. As we reflect on these stories, let us also acknowledge the resilience, courage, and agency of those who survived, spoke out, and fought for justice. Families, activists, scholars, and communities have preserved these narratives, demanded accountability, and challenged the pervasive culture of silence and denial. Their work reminds us that change is possible, even in the face of systemic oppression, and that each voice raised against injustice contributes to a broader chorus demanding fairness, recognition, and respect for all human lives. Thank you for joining us on this important exploration of history. By watching, learning, and engaging with these narratives, you are participating in a collective effort to honor the victims, confront the lies of the past, and commit to a more just and equitable society. If this video has opened your eyes, inspired reflection, or deepened your understanding, please consider liking the video, subscribing to our channel, and sharing it with friends and family. Together, we can spread awareness, inspire meaningful dialogue, and empower each other to act with empathy, courage, and integrity. Every share, every subscription, every conversation contributes to a world where truth prevails. Accountability matters, and the legacy of racial equality is carried forward. Let us continue to remember, to learn, and to act not just in memory of those who suffered, but to ensure that future generations inherit a society that values truth, justice, and humanity above deceit, prejudice, and hate. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to exploring more stories that challenge us, educate us, and inspire us to create a better,